Okay, we are looking at the transaction and purchase, product data, and we already ran the join operator to put together these two sets of data, and we use the fact that they both have a product key as one of their column names or one of their attributes, and we went through this part of the tutorial. The next, we're going to complete this by adding in another operator here called aggregate. So if we look at the data, this is what we put together. We also saw this in an Excel spreadsheet. So we have the row number, but we have the product ID, and it seems to be sorted in terms of product ID, but it doesn't have to be that way. We could sort it in terms of price and so on. Then it's no longer sorted in terms of product ID. Anyway, we had it sorted in terms of product ID, and we see that here's product 1 and product 2, product 3, and so on. And we might like to know, one thing we certainly would like to know is how many of each of these was sold. Well, actually, I don't want to say sold, but how many transactions were there for product ID 1? How many times was it sold? How many times was product ID sold, that is read aloud? Repressitol, how many times was that sold? We might like to know that question. We also might like to know how many were sold. Then we'd have to consider this column as well. Or another way to say this is that we want to know the number of customers that have purchased each of these. So basically what we mean by that is, here's one customer that purchased, here's another customer that purchased, here's another customer that purchased. And one way to do that, I'm sorry, this is the Excel sheet, of course. And one way to do that is we can do this in Excel in two ways that I know of, probably several other ways. So one way is to get to use what are called subtotals. So I'll try that out first. Subtotals. I have to just select one cell and try it again. Okay, and then it says at each change and then you can choose which of the columns or which of the variables you're considering. And before I do this, before I use the subtotal function, I have to sort by product ID, but it's already sorted by product ID, so I don't have to do that. But you would have to do that first. And then you'd say at each change, you use the count function. So that just says that you go down here and basically at the end, you count how many entries there are here. Now, typically you may not just want to do count. For example, you might like to know the amount, the total amount that was purchased of product 1, and then, so that would be what? You'd have to add 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 1 plus 2 and so on. Add those up, and then the same thing for number 2. You'd have to add up 4 plus 5 plus 3 plus and so on. And you get the number of products that were purchased. So in fact, let's do that first. That's not what we're doing in the tutorial, but let's just do it anyway. So at each change in product ID, let's get the sum. And we want the sum of what? We want the sum of the amount. So this means we're going to add, but we haven't changed the product ID yet. So once we get to a change in the product ID, so here we get to a change, then we say, okay, what was the count for everything above that? And then we do the same thing for the next one. We go add this plus this plus this, and we keep going until there's a change here. So you can see that if we hadn't sorted this by product ID, then we could have, here was product 1, product 1, product 2. So you get a subtotal there, but you don't really want that. Okay, so let's see how this works. And here we set, let's see, we don't really have to worry about that. And okay, I think this should work. And let's see what this gives us. So here, at each change in product ID, we get the subtotal. Actually, it seems to have changed. It didn't used to do it this way. They're putting the total above. Usually it used to be below, as far as I recall. But anyway, so here, that means that the sum of this, and all of this is 55. So that tells us that there were 55 orders of Repressitol, or 55, I don't know what we say, packages of Repressitol. And there were 30 packages of Ridilute. And there were 23 packages of this one. So we can do that. We did that using the subtotal function. And there's also a grand total up here. This is the total number of all of the entries in the amount column. And then another thing you can do with this is you can click up here on these, and these collapse this so that you could get rid of all the details here, and you'll just see the 55. And you'll get rid of all the details here, and you'll just see the 30. So if you want to do that, you click here on 2. This is the most expanded view, but we want this. So now we can see that, unfortunately, it doesn't give us the names, but we can see that the first one was 55, and the next one was 30, and the next one was that. And then I guess if we click here, we get an even more collapsed view. We only see the grand total. If we want to go back and see all of them, we can click here, and then you can click just an individual one to see the details. But you can also click here to see all the details. Okay, so that's one way to get this information. Oh, sorry, but that's not what we wanted, actually. We are going, so let's go back and do it again. Now, because in the tutorial, that's not what they're interested in, not getting these 55 and 30 and so on. They are interested in getting this. The product ID is the count. And we're not working on this column. We want to know how many are in here. So let's just count how many product IDs occur here. Here's one, here's another, here's another. In other words, how many rows are there here? We could have used the product name instead of the product ID because it just, this would count as 1, this would count as 1, this would count as 1. So it would get the same, we get this number 30 again. So let's see, I'm sorry, get this number 55 again. So let's see that. No, sorry, we wouldn't get these numbers. Sorry about that. I don't mean to say that. Okay, let's keep going anyway. Okay, so now we can see there were 19, I guess, customer transactions here. And then there were 8 customer transactions here for this one. And there were 9 for this one. And there were 14 for this one, and so on. So that's what they're doing in the tutorial. They're getting these numbers, 19, 8, 9, and so on. Okay, now there's another, this is sort of an old way of doing this kind of thing. There's a newer way, and that's using pivot tables. So let's do that. And how do we get rid of these, by the way? I forget how we can clear this. I can always use back, but there must be another way to do this, but I don't remember it, so I'm just going to go back like that. Okay, so there's another way to do this. Just click in the set of data, and you use a pivot table. So you do insert and pivot table. And you get this, and I want to do it on a new worksheet. So I get this. And now the table that I want to build is I want to have, product 1 and product 2. Now it's not written like this, but I want to have each product, and then I want to have the counts just like before. So I want the rows here to be the different products. So like, and then this one was, I forget, 19, and I think this was 8, and maybe this was 9, whatever it was. So because there were 19 transactions of product 1, and 8 transactions of product 2, and 9 transactions of product 3. This is the kind of information we want to get. Now, going back to here, the way you do that is you just say, I want to build this kind of table that I started to make up here. And you have to say, what do you want to be in the rows? So in this case, we want the rows to be the different products. So we just take the product ID and drag it into this rows section. So let's do that. Okay, so now we have the different product IDs here. I thought it should have a label here. I don't know why it doesn't have a label, but okay. Anyway, we know what it is. These are the product IDs. And then we wanted a count, not a sum, not the average, whatever. We want the count of these. So we can do this. We can also drag this into the values. The values are what happens sort of, you can imagine a table that looks like, say, a table looks something like this. You have some table here, and you have columns here, and you have rows along here, row names here, and column names here, and then you have stuff inside the table. And that's what is going on here. So going back to here, we want something to be calculated. And that's the stuff that's going on inside this table, or that's the stuff here. In this case, we don't really have columns. We didn't build any columns over here. Maybe I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But right now we just want, we want to know not the sum, but the count. So you go here. You don't do this move to report filter, move to row labels, and so on. But that's not what we want. We want this. View field settings. So let's go to that. And we can choose, do we want the sum? That's what we currently have, but that's not what we wanted. We want the count. So there. Now we have those same numbers, 19 for product 1, 8 for that, 9 for that, and so on. Okay. Now, as I said, if you wanted to have an extra, so here we have rows, but suppose you wanted to have another variable along this way. So that is, suppose you wanted to see the product category. Maybe this data can't really use this very well, but well, let's try the customer ID. Let's put that in the columns area. Let's see what that looks like. It's probably going to be a very big. Maybe what we should do instead, well, I'll just do that. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now what we get is, this is product ID 1, and customer number 31 had 1. Remember, this is count. So it was, and then we can see customer 47, they did it once. They purchased once. And customer number 62 purchased once. So now what we have is, like I said, we have more of a kind of a table here, because we have different columns and different rows. But that's not what they're asking us to do in the problem in the tutorial. So we could get rid of this just by taking this and dragging it out. I guess you drag it out here. And now you get back to this. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we're trying to do. And we want to do it in RapidMiner. So let's go through the tutorial. So they say we want the aggregate operator. So that's they say aggregate performs a group by function. So we're grouping by product ID. So we're putting everything with product ID together. We're putting everything with product ID 1 together. We're putting everything with product ID 2 together, and so on. So we're grouping by product ID. Okay, so let's see how we do this. So first we need the aggregate operator, which is here. And you put it here. And then we have to set the parameters for this. So we select it to do that. If you want to set the parameters for this, you would select that. You select this and click Aggregate to select it. And then click on Aggregation Attributes. So Aggregation Attributes here. And click this. And then in here, select Customer ID in the left and count. So we want to count each separate customer ID per product ID. Okay, so select the customer ID. Okay, stay in this dialog box. So don't close this yet. Don't cancel. Don't apply. Don't quit yet. Stay in this dialog box and add another entry. So click this and add product name here. This is seems like a peculiar way to do this, but what they're saying is they want to also show the product name, but you have to select a function here. Now you don't want the average of a product name, right? That doesn't make any sense. You can't take the average of a name. And concatenation, I don't know what that means in this case. Counting. You don't want to count this. You don't want the least, the only occurring. I don't know. Maybe some of these might work, or even the maximum might work, but it's kind of peculiar. Anyway, the mode means the most frequently occurring product name. So, okay. So let's apply this. Okay, and then click on Group By Attributes here, and we want to group by product ID, as we said, and click Apply. Okay, and now hopefully we'll get the same kind of numbers that we saw in this pivot table here. 19, 8, 9, 14, 9, and so on. So let's run it. Okay, so there we get 19, 8, 9, and so on. And we get the names as well. Now, going back to here, if you wanted to see the product names here, I guess one way to do that would be just to drag this into the rows column here, or I'm sorry, the rows box here. And now we get its ID is 1, but its name is this. Its ID is 2, but its name is that. And so on. Okay, so going back to the tutorial, it says, great, you just made your first steps for data blending with RapidMiner. Before you move on to the next tutorial, try to answer the questions below. Which product has been most often sold, and which product was sold only 5 times? Can you find out in the Statistics tab what the average number of transactions was? Can you also see the visual distribution of values in this tab? So remember, the Statistics tab is over here, and you can see some statistics here. The count function counts the number of transactions for each product, but each product can also be purchased multiple times in each transaction. Can you change the parameters of Aggregate so that the total sum for each product is calculated? Which products have been sold more than 65 times? Okay, so I'll leave that as an exercise, and we will go on.